Hi, I'm Mr. McKenzie, and welcome to Biology, AP Bio. And we're going to be learning about evolution today. We're going to be learning about the different aspects of evolution and how they occur. And we're going to learn about Darwin and what Charles Darwin was and influences on Charles Darwin in this aspects. Um, as we look through here, we can see that evolution is a change, a process that means a change in an organism over time. It's based on science, it's not based on opinion, so it's got a lot of scientific fact to it. When you're looking at an evolutionary tree like this, wherever you see a branch, that is going to be where there is a common ancestor. So each common ancestor is going to be wherever the branch is going to be occurring. So as you look at these, you can see which ones are more closely related. Those are the ones that are going to be, branching at the same time, or they have a branch between them. So they're done in millions of years. We can look at these. So as we draw across this, we can see how many million years ago the branch occurred or this actually happened, right? Um, Same thing is true on this slide. We can see that evolution, that Darwin thought evolution. He said this is a descent with modification, meaning our descendants have been modified over and over again to show this. So these changes happen through time, and as each change happens, there's an accumulation of differences. So, like we have an accumulation of limbs. So, those limbs, if I move back, those limbs would actually be moving on to everywhere else above it has these limbs to it, and so on and so forth. Amniotic eggs, everything has an amniotic egg past that. So, we can look at those. So, they're just descendants of each type we're looking for. Darwin, he was influenced by a lot of people. He was influenced by his father and his grandfather. Um, his father was a doctor and his grandfather was a doctor, and they would like him to become kind of a upper society individual. Darwin liked to hunt and fish. He liked to do a lot of science activities that were frowned on the English type of public education at the time. His father then sent him in at the age of 16 to Edinburgh University. Here he just flourished because he learned again more how to make study skins and how to look at different types of comparative anatomy and how to view different things in geology, different aspects. He was studying different scientists of his time and scientists of the earlier time. He learned a lot, and a lot was became a very. He learned about a lot of these great thinkers and free thinkers. He studied medicine for a while, but didn't like it because of the blood, and he didn't like it because of the 19th century style of medicine at the time. Um, so he left there to Cambridge University, where he got a degree in theology. His Some of the people that influenced him were, of course, Aristotle, that he learned about with his scala natura, how things are very classified and they are fixed positions, whether they're minerals, plants, or animals, or humans. Each one of those would be at a fixed spot, and they wouldn't change. There wouldn't be any changing. The next person was a guy by the name of Carlos Linnaeus, and he did the classification that we use today, the classification system that we still use with the domain and then kingdoms, phylums, class, order, family, genus, and species. And then his classification was based on anatomy and morphology and how things would work within anatomy and morphology. Um, then, of course, there was this guy by the name of George Cuvier. Cuvier talked about how older rock strata are going to have different types of fossils in them, and younger rock strata or stratifications of rock are going to have different types of fossils in those. And he noticed that species came and left. So he noticed about extinction. He was not a believer of evolution, though. He did not think evolution did occur. These are some of the rock strata that I'm talking about. If this would be the oldest rock strata, would be down at the bottom, and then the youngest rock strata would be at the top. And so we'd have different fossils located within each one of those strata. Okay? Um, then we see another person, Thomas Malthus, who wrote the Malthusian Doctrine. And his ideas were about how that if human population kept increasing and the death rate kept decreasing, that we would run out of food and we'd run out of water and we'd run out of the different resources and diseases would start running rampant. Well, that's kind of like today. But he thought that the populations would then branch out, or they would get level off, and after they level off, after they level off, we would notice that would be at the carrying capacity. If they went above the carrying capacity, they could crash down. We'll talk about that more in ecology. Um, but this is all competition for resources. And Darwin took that to look at, doesn't every different type of organism compete for resources? And could this drive changes in evolution? That was probably one of his a good thought, a clear thought that he would have. Jean-Baptiste Lamarck was another person that he studied. Lamarck was the first really to publish and come up with something on evolution, and he really looked at what global evolution, this large evolution, how we had a global evolution working on this. But his ideas were a little bit different because he didn't really look at the variations of the species and variations within species. He thought about how organisms would be, if you use or disuse, or you use something, you would pass on those traits that you use. Um, with Lamarck, it would be something like if you were a bodybuilder and you were lifting weights and you gained all these muscles, then your offspring then would have muscles. He wouldn't see anything else within that portion. This would be like how you got today's giraffe, okay? And the giraffe would be like shorter, like a common day copy that we'd find today. Um, and the neck would be very, very short, and it would be eating things low vegetation. And then as the vegetation was being consumed, it would start stretching its neck going to the higher vegetation. And it would do this over and over and over again until it reproduced. And then it would have this long neck that it would will itself to have. It would have this very long neck. Well, if it wills itself to have this, then he was missing the variations of the traits. He said there was no changes or no changes in the variation. That's just not true. We should see variant offspring, offspring that have a variety of different issues with it. Um, then we get into Charles Lyell's book. Charles Lyell was also an influence on him. In fact, Darwin carried Charles Lyell's book with him and used his book. Um, Lyell was a geologist, but he was the first to really go, the Earth is millions of years old instead of, thousands of years old. He was really big into thinking of deep time, and gave Darwin the note that, hey, this Earth is shaping a very, very slow process. James Hutton was his father of modern geology and came up with this law of uniformitarianism, meaning that what happened in the past is what's happening today. So how we see things occurring in front of us today was how those things must have happened in the past. That's the law of uniformitarianism, and that's was a big concept. Um, I have this quote on here because Darwin was thinking about a lot of things, right? But it's not the strongest of the species that survive, nor the most intelligent that survive, but the ones that are most responsive to change. Meaning that those organisms that have a lot of variations within them and can change no matter what happens to the environment. So if it gets colder, then there should be some kind of variations within them to be able to handle the cold temperature. And if it gets warmer, there should be a variation in the species that allows it to survive a warm temperature. It might not be the individual, but the species in general. So the individuals might have a trait that doesn't allow them to survive, but the species as a whole has the variations to allow them to survive. He took his trip, like I said, on the HMS Beagle. He traveled around the world. Um, they left in 1831. He was 22 years old. And they went mainly in the southern hemisphere. His dad paid for him to go and for two assistants to go with him. He also was going to be the confidant of the captain on the ship because the captain couldn't talk to the crew because he gave orders. So what he would do is that he'd eat dinner with them and he would talk about his findings and he would talk about maybe different things in evolution and different things of maybe in the Bible, God, all sorts of stuff. Darwin would talk about with the ship's captain. He didn't really like the ship's captain all that much from the readings I've had about it. Um, but he did see some things too that he experienced or he learned in the classroom. So while in South America, he noticed that these uplifting of rocks and it fit with Lyell's ideas when he was saw an earthquake and he was there with an earthquake. He saw fossils that of ocean critters that were in the Andes Mountains, and he saw fossils of ocean critters that were up on the land where these ocean critters could have never got to. And he thought, this must be this fits a lot with the ideas of Cuvier. Also, when he went to the Galapagos Islands, he saw a lot of organisms that resembled other organisms from mainland South America. Um, this was his trip. His trip lasted, like we said, 5 years. He went mainly in the southern hemisphere. You could see around South America. He did spend time at the Galapagos Islands, which is off the coast of Ecuador, right over here. He did go to Tahiti. He went around to Australia, and then he made his trip over to Africa too, and then back to South America and back to England, as you can see on this. These are the Galapagos Islands. While on the Galapagos, he noticed that there was different tortoises, different finches or birds. He noticed that there was a lot of different things that were going to be happening on here. I'm trying to find myself somewhere. Um, Within this portion that you could look at, there are no land mammals um, on here. There's some aquatic mammals that live on the islands, like sea lions and seals, but there are no land mammals, there's only these birds and amphibians, or there's no amphibians either. There's either birds or reptiles that you're going to find in here. And so he had a variety of different ones. Watch this video too. That video will help you. On some stuff with Galapagos Islands, you can see that there are these islands that we have that are off the coast. There's a variety of different types of climates kind of to them. Some are desert-like, some are different, some are tropical-like, some have more grasslands, but they range in what they look like. Some are mountainous, some are going to be, non-mountainous on these portions. There's some of the organisms that we find, like we said, the sea lions, the um, iguanas, which are like aquatic iguanas, which are very, very odd. And then we have these tortoises that we find on here. And then, of course, the different types of climates that we would find in biomes. Darwin's finches, he thought these finches were all different types of birds. They were different species of birds, but when he got back and he had made study skins when he found these and preserved them, he noticed that they were from the same genus. So they were all different types of finches. And he noticed that each finch had a different beak because of what type of food it could eat. And so there must have been an adaptation within the species to get a thicker bill or a thinner bill or a medium sized bill so they could eat different types of foods. And they all look different depending upon where they live and depending upon what is with them, too. Are they by themselves or are they having to work together? So are they allotropic or are they sympatric species? Um, and then Darwin's finches, like we can see, these are goldfinches we'd find around here. And they would have to have specialized beaks, or they would resource partition if you're looking at the different types of foods that they would eat. So what types of foods would they eat is going to be dependent upon what other birds are there, so they would have to partition them out. If their bills are looking for, if they can eat bigger seeds than other birds that are on there, then they would eat bigger seeds. If their bills are small enough to eat smaller seeds, then they'd eat the smaller seeds if bigger bills were there. So we call that resource partitioning, dividing it up depending upon what food supply or what resources you can use. Um, the conclusion that he got is like, and remember, behaviors can be inherited too. He decided that the ancestral groups of finches colonized the islands. Um, and these ancestral groups looked a lot like the ones that came from mainland South America. In the absence of competitors, of any other type of bird would allow these finches to gradually specialize, especially with different foods that they would have to eat that they found on the island. These are some of the birds that you would find, and they have all different types of bills. The bills are going to be the main part that you're going to see. Here's just some more. Again, the common ancestors, where the common ancestors would be placed is where we'd have the branching that would go on with it. Um, Adaptations that we've talked about before, an adaptation is just where species pass on an inherited trait and increase their ability to survive in a specific environment. If the environment is good for that species, it will survive well. If the environment changes drastically and it's not good for that species, then that species will not survive too well. It might even die out. But it has to have a variation within the traits that allows it to survive. Remember, adaptations are really about evolution. They is evolution. But if there's an ability for us to evolve, if we can evolve quickly, then we must have a lot of adaptations within us, or those adaptations then help us survive in the changing environment. If we adapt too slowly, the environment changes too quickly, then we have a good chance of becoming. And about 99% of all species that have lived on the earth have already gone extinct. This is a good example here where we're looking at a fox. This is actually the Sahara Desert fox, a fennec fox, and it has very, very large ears, a small body. They have some low body mass. That way they could get rid of heat really quickly. Longer legs too on it. When you look at something like an Arctic fox, it's going to have a shorter ears, it's going to have a shorter tail, it's going to have a larger body to it, larger body mass, so it can survive. And that's what natural selection is all about. It's about results in an adaptation of species in an environment by means of selecting and reproducing with the proper genotype. Um, Natural selection, along with genetic drift, mutations, migrations, and are the basics mechanisms for evolution. What drives evolution or adaptation is the change in the environment. If the environment changes too fast, like we said, the adaptations can occur. Species that have fast generation times reproduce quickly, have a better chance to evolve. Species with a long generation time tend to go extinct on this. Three conditions for natural selection to occur. We need genetic variation in a population. We need variations among individuals that must result in differences in numbers of offspring that can survive. And we must have variation must be genetically inherited. We'll talk about a lot of this in our next part of evolution when we go over Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. So some of this too, as we can see, the variations within the population, what this is all going to do is it's going to cause us to be better adapted, to be reproduce more, to have greater fitness, to again be better adapted, and to reproduce more and have better fitness. Organisms that survive here, favorable variations have the better adaptations, fitness, genetic combinations to the next generation, and environmental select traits that are going to be at work here. Descent with modification is what Darwin really thought of as natural selection. Organisms are going to and ancestors that live in remote past or natural selection. So this is one of Darwin's sketches right here that he was sketching out his tree of life, basically, which we have, something like that on this side, on the slide. Natural selection, there's a constant struggle, right, for existence. And we're talking about this with descent with modification. We're constantly looking at organisms are going to struggle to exist. The organism that is best suited for this environment will reproduce more selectively or successfully, and so it'll have survival of the fittest. He didn't coin this term, it was coined later, but we can think of survival of the fittest for that. This is some things with it. Selection might be selecting food, whether it's going to be standing out or sticking out. We can find the food, we can see the food. Something like this owl too, picking up the pocket mouse, the rock pocket mouse that we can talk about later, if it's in an environment where it's going to stand out like a sore thumb. And those, so the variations too of the species are like in the top one where we have a selection. Oops, let me go back, sorry. if we have the selection of these different types of caterpillars, if the green ones aren't selected, if they're selected for survival, because the yellow ones are sticking out like a sore thumb, and the bird can pick it off. And the same thing is true with that rock pocket mouse. It's on if it's in an environment where it's easily seen, then they will be selected against, and the darker mice will be left to reproduce. And then natural selection too, we have like we have a differential in survival, and which ones are going to have be more fit are going to be what the environment lets you kind of work with. So these offspring are going to be able to pass, or I'm sorry, yeah, the offspring can pass on their traits to the next generation, and you can produce more offspring and more offspring and more offspring. Um, and if the environment changes, and the individuals need to change with that environment. Um, Populations evolve, not the individual. So each population makes the change. So main ideas to natural selection. Evolution is a change in species over time. There's an overreproduction of offspring, which will lead to competition for resources. Heritable variations exist within a population. These variations can result in differential reproduction success. Over generations, this can result in changes in the genetic composition of the population. That would be what we consider the gene pool. And remember, individuals do not evolve, populations evolve. All right, so that's all the time we have for today. Thank you.